everyone, welcome to the Rider's Edge TV. My name is Josh. I'm usually behind the camera telling Karen what to do, but you know what? I'm the one that gets to go out and have all the fun while she's stuck at the shop doing all the fixes and repairs. Now, I might not be as good as looking as she is, but you know what? I'm having fun. We're going to see different vendors. We're going to see manufacturers, custom builders, racers, all kinds of cool things that we got coming up for the show. In fact, today we're at Nick Anglada Originals, and Nick Anglada himself is going to do a tire change because one of our viewers requested that's what he wanted to see. So Michael Figueroa, this is just for you.
Hi, I'm Nick Anglada with Nick Anglada Originals, and on this episode of the Rider's Edge TV, we're going to be changing the front tire on this 2005 Yamaha R1. As we're taking the front tire off this R1 today, we want to emphasize safety first. You want to make sure that the rear tire is secure before you lift the front tire off the ground. Front wheel stands tend to make the bike steer, so if the rear wheel is locked in place, you won't have a chance of the bike falling over, damaging your bike, or causing injury to yourself. So in order to change the tire on this R1 today, we're going to need basic hand tools that are readily available. You're going to need a socket set, a ratchet, and some Allen wrenches. These obviously are going to be different sizes from different motorcycles. The best thing to do is always check your owner's manual. That way you can always check torque specs when you're putting everything back together. First off, what we want to do is we want to loosen the front fender. But on a lot of motorcycles nowadays, what happens is that the brake line is attached with a bracket to the front fender. And since this is so short, it keeps you from moving the caliper out in order to remove the wheel. So on this bike, just to be safe, we're going to go ahead and remove the front fender. It can be a little bit tight, and you might have to squeeze the back of the fender to pull it through. But what you don't want to do is leave it on, because if you pull the wheel forward, it's going to fall down and it will scratch the fender. So with the fender moved out of the way, we can access everything readily. So on this bike, we're going to have to remove the calipers, because due to the offset of the rotors, the calipers actually get in the way of removing the wheel. Now these are radial mount calipers, which means the bolts actually go in from the top. A lot of older bikes will have axial mount, even some newer bikes still have axial mounts where the bolts come in from the side to attach them to the forks. Now a neat little trick is once you get this caliper off, to get it out of your way, is to take it wrap the caliper so it's protected. Take a bungee cord, put it around your brake line, and then wrap the bungee cord around your grip. This will pull the caliper out of the way, it'll protect the caliper from scratching the paint, and it'll give you better access when you're remounting the wheel, as the calipers aren't hitting the wheel when you're doing this. This particular model, we're going to be breaking this bolt out of the end of the axle. What it does is it actually pulls the axle tight and presses up against the spacers up against the bearings. Next, we have to loosen the pinch bolts on both fork legs. You don't need to completely remove these, just make sure that there's not any pressure on either one. Now there's going to be anywhere from 1 to 2 pinch bolts on each fork leg. Once they're loose, move on to the other side, do the same thing, and at that point you'll be ready to remove the axle. Now we're ready to remove the front axle. Depending on the condition of the bike and how many times it's been worked on, and weather conditions that sometimes corrode aluminum or steel, it depends how it's going to come out. Usually, without even using any type of ratchet, just by putting the hex in here, you'll be able to turn and pull it out. If this doesn't work, you'll need to attach the ratchet to put additional pressure to be able to pull it. this doesn't always work. Now, our last step, if the axle is seized, is to take a brass punch and a plastic dead blow hammer. The reason we're using a brass punch, this is softer than the actual axle and will not ruin any of the threads or cause any damage to the forks. You would just put this in and tap lightly. Now, while you're doing this, you want to make sure that you keep one hand on the wheel to keep it elevated so it doesn't drop down. Once we have the wheel elevated, we pull the axle out, we can actually bring the wheel down. Now, this is very important. You want to make sure that any spacers that are on your wheels are taken off and laid on the side that they actually came off of. Some bikes have different size spacers, so if they get mixed up, it can cause a lot of damage to your rotors, calipers, or even wheels. First things first, we want to remove this valve cap. Maybe a little bit tight, depending on how long it's been on the bike. Now here, what we're going to do is we're going to remove the valve core. Now, this can be done different ways. Sometimes you can go ahead and change the valve stem itself. Depending on the age of the bike, rubber valve stems are like anything else rubber. It will dry rot over time, and sometimes it's safer to go ahead and replace them. Since these are in pretty good shape, we're going to go ahead and keep these and just remove the core. So there's many makes and models of manual tire machines out there. There's even automatic tire machines. The manual ones are far cheaper. This one here is a Coach 220. You can probably find one that's used, readily available for anywhere from $200 to $400. The guy that's doing track days makes a lot of sense. Running back and forth to the dealership, spending $50 every time on a tire change. You know, you could easily save yourself the money, buy one of these, and save a lot of money in the long run just due to the fact that you're changing the tires yourself. Next, we're going to break the bead, but we want to make sure that we protect the wheel to not scratch the paint, and we also want to make sure we protect the rotors so we don't bend them. It's not always necessary to remove the rotors in order to take the tire off. This is actually the bead breaker. What the bead does is actually pushes on this right here and it breaks it. So what we'll do is we actually put a rag here to make sure that this part here doesn't scratch your wheel. On the other side, what we do is we take a piece of 2x4 with some kind of padding or even a rag on top, and what this does is elevate the wheel so we're not pushing the wheel up against the ground and scratching it with concrete. At the same time that we're elevating the wheel, we're making sure that the rotors don't hit the ground. A common mistake that people make is they'll push the rotors, and sometimes they'll bend due to the fact that it's so hard to break the bead on some of these tires depending on how long they've been on the vehicle. Now here we're pulling the pin to actually adjust how far we need to be able to break the bead. Move the pin, set it where you need it, make sure that everything is secure, put one foot on your tire, and then push down. Once the bead is broken, we can actually step around with our foot and break it all the way around to make sure that it's loose. It's very important because you're not going to be able to clamp it on the machine without breaking the bead. The bead is broken on both sides. Now we're ready to secure it to the clamp. So for demonstration purposes, we're going to be using an old used wheel that's no longer roadworthy to show you exactly how the machine clamps onto the tire. By removing the wheel, you can see that there's hooks here in 3 different spots. Now these adjust depending on what size wheel you have. So you might be running a cruiser that has a 21-inch front wheel, and you'll have to adjust these accordingly. These 2 actually pull out and can be moved into a different slot. The 3rd one is actually adjusted by a crank that's on a screw. So once they're in place and they're secure, you turn the handle until it's snug. Now, depending on what kind of wheel you're running, I recommend that you put some kind of tape or a rag to protect your wheel so that way it doesn't get scratched. So now that we have the wheel in place, it's locked down, everything's tight and secure, the wheel's not going to move. We bring the arm down and we set the latch back here. So as we're pressing the bar to take the tire off, this doesn't come off. Now, there's several choices in taking tires off. A lot of people use dish soap with water. Other people use tire lube, but sometimes it's hard to get off the tire and gets on the actual tread. What I like to use is a biodegradable, environmentally friendly cleaner diluted with water a little bit. This makes it easy to take the tire off. Now next, what we do is we take the bar. We push the tire down, hook the lip of the bar on the edge of the tire. And when you do this, you want to lift up on the tire to make sure that you get what we call a drop center. Once this is done, the main thing I want to show you is don't do this. Do not pull on the bar. You'll get a lot better leverage by setting your hip on the bar, pulling the bottom of the tire up so you make sure you have a drop center, and just walking around. By doing this, the tire comes off a lot easier and you won't strain anything trying to pull it apart. We're going to repeat the process, second bead off, which is a little bit trickier because you have to pull both beads this time. Again, hip on the bar, lift up on the tire so you have a drop center, move it around, and voila. So now we're ready to mount on the new tire. Now, it's very important you look at this closely. The R1 has a directional wheels, which means that the spokes are swept in a certain direction. If you have swept spokes, rule of thumb is always slice, not hook. So you want the spokes to be sweeping back, and that's going to be forward facing. Otherwise, there are wheels out there that are straight spoke, but they always have a marking with an arrow to tell you which direction they go. Same as the tire. All tires are going to have some kind of directional arrow that'll tell you which way the tire needs to be going. Now, here, since we have the tire going this way and the wheels are actually sweeping and not hooking, this is how we're going to mount the tire. Again, we spray our cleaner on both sides. To put the first bead on, you usually will not need the bar. You just simply push and it falls on. Bring the arm back down. Repeat the process of locking the arm in place. We'll use the other side of the bar now, which is the hook that actually pushes the tire down as we go around. Okay. All right. As you're pushing the tire down, you want to make sure that your bead stays down all the way around. Once you do this, again, put your hip in place. Yeah. Would you bring me a 16? So the key is, so I'm having a little bit of a tough time here, is we're going to need two people. Somebody's going to have to hold the bar down and keep the top bead drop center. As we walk it around, we want to make sure that this side doesn't raise up. And there we go. So now we're going to replace the valve core, reinstall it. It's kind of a tight fit. Once the core is in, we use our core removing tool to reinstall it and tighten it until it's snug. Once it's snug, you're ready to put the air in. Now here, we're going to be using a air nozzle that actually has an air pressure gauge on it. So as we air up the tire, we make sure that we have the correct air pressure. You might have to overfill it to seat the beads, but once done, you should release some air back out of it or add more, just depending on what the manufacturer's spec call for. I just want to make sure I don't pinch my hand in here. All the beads are seated. We have about 30 pounds pressure in here. And we're ready to mount. What we'll do is we'll actually read the manual and make sure that the air pressure is correct according to the manual and the manufacturer specifications. So we're ready to balance this wheel and tire combination. What we have here is a static balancer that you can buy probably from your local motorcycle dealer. They have it in Parts Unlimited, other places like that. They run about $150, maybe $170 at the most, depending on which model that you buy. This is pretty easy. What you do is you take the cones out on one side. You replace the cone so it pushes up against the bearing. And when you have it snug, this actually takes a 3mm Allen wrench. You turn it until it's tight. That way there's no movement. And then we take the axle and set it on the rollers. Now the idea behind a static balancer is that the heaviest spot in the wheel is actually going to pull towards the bottom. As you can see, right now it's pulling towards the heavy spot. It'll rotate back and forth. And obviously the heavy spot here is where we previously had weight. Now, you want to remove the original weights because obviously the wheel and tire combination is not going to be balanced like the previous one was. Once the weight is removed, we'll let the wheel go again to see where our heavy spot is. The idea behind a bubble balancer is you want to counterbalance the heavy spot. So you want to draw a line exactly from where the tire stops at the bottom all the way to the top of the wheel. This is where you're going to be adding weight. Okay. Now that we've found this heavy spot in the wheel, we're going to take some brake cleaner, spray it on a rag, and we're going to clean where the heavy spot is to make sure that our adhesive is going to stick. Now the reason we're using brake cleaner is because most of the dirt that's on here is actually comes from the brake pads. We're going to do the same thing up top where we're going to mark, we're going to put our weights. Now the reason we mark the bottom where our heavy spot is because we're going to take a piece of blue tape and mark our heavy spot. This way when we spin the wheel around, we come all the way down 180 degrees around and we know exactly where our weights are going to go. Now these are basic lead tape weights that you can buy at any auto parts store. They come in 1/4 ounce, which is about 7 grams a piece. And depending on how fast your heavy spot rolls and pulls down is depending on how much weight you're going to need. This one doesn't seem to be going too fast. Sometimes when they are going too fast, you might have a problem with your wheel being bent. Now that we have our heavy spot at 180 degrees at the top, we're gonna put our tape weights on the bottom. Again, take some brake cleaner, clean the surface. Any dirt that's on here is gonna keep the adhesive from sticking, which the weights will not stick to the wheel. We're gonna take here 1 1/4 ounces, and I'm only pulling up a tiny bit of the tape. I'm gonna make sure that my tape weights are dead center at the bottom. I'm barely gonna press them, and I'll rotate my weight. Now, obviously now you can see this is the heavier spot. So at this point, we know we don't need this much weight. I'm gonna go ahead and take 2 weights off of here. As you can see, these are easily, you can move them back and forth and they break. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can always use a set of side cutters to cut your weight and trim it accordingly. If your weight needs less than 1/4 ounce, you can always cut your weights in half. Again, we're gonna peel one side up. We're gonna mark it bottom dead center. We wanna move weight in a couple places. If again, that is a heavy spot, then we're gonna trim another weight back. Keep repeating the process until you get the accurate weight, and when you stop the wheel, it doesn't pull anymore. So now, we've actually found a balance between the heavy spot and the weight. And though it's only taken this 2/4 ounce weights, so it's 1/2 ounce or 14 grams. As you can see, the wheel is either barely moving or not moving at all. And this is when you know it's balanced. At this point, bring it back down to the bottom, pull the rest of your adhesive off, and firmly press the weight onto the wheel. This will secure it. Also, if you're doing track days or racing, a good rule of thumb is to put duct tape over here so it doesn't spin off. So now we're gonna put the wheel back in. Obviously, there's directional arrows to tell you which way you're going. Your spacers, if you laid them on the side that they came off of, will go right back in. On some bikes, the spacers don't sit in properly or they don't sit in a seal. So you will need a second hand to keep the spacer in while you put in the axle. So the tricky part is putting the wheel back in, holding the spacers in place, and yeah. So once we get everything lined up, depending on the bike, sometimes you might need to get a buddy to help you line up the axle and support the weight of the wheel while you push everything through. Go and hand me that mallet. I'm gonna have Josh hold this, that way we make sure everything's lined up. There we go. Now that we have everything lined up, we tap the axle through. We'll replace the bolt on the other side that cinches the axle. Snug it up just a little bit. Then we finish tightening up the axle. Again, check your manufacturer's. Again, check your manufacturer's service manual for torque specs. They will be different from every model. Now we're going to tighten up the pinch bolts completely on both the left and right side of the forks. Ready? Now we'll remount our fender. Once again, I'm Nick Anglada with Nick Anglada Originals. I'd like to thank the Riders Edge TV for having me as a guest host on their show today. And as always, ride smart and be safe.
Thanks, Nick. You did a great job fixing that tire on that R1. That actually came in from one of our viewers. He wanted to see that done. And if you have a question that you want to see done for our show on your bike or a different type of motorcycle, please email us or write to us on our Facebook page. Like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we really appreciate the time that you spend watching the Riders Edge TV. Now, as always, as we say, ride smart and be safe. You did a great job on changing the tire on that R1 today, and we want to thank Nick Anglada Originals.